You've got the one where you can see my screen right now, and then also you see this orange screen as well. So this is our last lesson for Unit 9. It is going to go over a little bit about just how the war is affecting different groups of the society and the major turning points in the later years of the war and how the war actually comes to an end. So just before we get going, we'll try to do one of these questions right now, just to make sure everybody can do that. This is just simply asking you to, what word would you use to describe the Civil War? What just one word, can be anything that you think kind of captures the idea of what we're looking at here. And if you have the Google Meets tab open, as well as your Poll Everywhere tab, you will be able to, you can type yours in and you can see what everybody else is typing as well. So obviously, the larger the word, the more times that it has been used. So I think that using a word like bloody, or one of the first ones that popped up was chaos. I think that definitely all of these words so far have definite meaning and definite connection to all of the Civil War, all the different points of it. Liberating, that's a good one. Very good mix of different words, different ideas. And I think all of them really do a good job of kind of tying into grotesque. Nice.
That was me.
Oh, okay, Miss Allen. I mean, okay, I take it back. It wasn't that great. It was okay. It was okay.
If you would compliment me.
It was okay. It was okay.
Anonymously.
All right, catastrophic. Was that Miss Powers, or was that a student? I hope that it was a student, because
Student. It wasn't
all right,
me.
good. No, I think that if you take a look at this word mash here, you see all of these things. I think if you are living in the United States during the Civil War, all of these things are going to come to your mind when you think of what is happening in the Civil War. But I do think that the word that is the largest here, where it says bloody, at the end of the day, the Civil War claims more American lives than any other war that we fight throughout our history, even World War I, World War II, when you get into the 1900s. So I think that's a good way to look at it. So, all right. So, a divisive time. Disagreements within both the Union and the Confederacy caused problems both in the North and in the South. Shortages of food caused riots. Caused different riots throughout the South, and shortages of food as well. In the South, slaves often worked slowly or maybe stopped working altogether, which really is going to cause a problem for Southern farmers, Southern plantations, those different people that are providing food and goods to the Southern Army. Slaves ran away in the South in the thousands after the Emancipation Proclamation to go to the North, be free, maybe even join in the Army. So those are all things that are happening in the South. The North had their own issues as well. In the North, groups of Northern Democrats who call themselves Copperheads basically are going forward and saying, hey, we want this Civil War to end. Because you have to remember, I think if you look at the word wall that we had you're looking at a lot of bloodshed, a very chaotic time. I mean, I think that if you are an American during that time, you want the war to end one way or the other. And this group of Northern Democrats is going to be calling for the war to end peacefully, basically just to make peace with the South. So if we look at these pictures right here, you'll see there are going to be riots over food shortages in the South. There's going to be riots over the draft that will be implemented as well. This political cartoon kind of shows you a little bit about the idea of that copperhead mentality of these people in the Northern Democrats. They want to end the war with basically saying, hey, we'll have two different nations now. We'll have the Confederate States of America and we'll have the United States of America, and that's all it is. So Lincoln knows that if we have a large group of people that are arguing that, hey, we need to end the war, it's going to really hurt the war effort on the Union side in the North. So he decides to essentially, as a war measure, suspend the writ of habeas corpus. That, if you remember back to our Constitution unit, habeas corpus is basically saying you can only be arrested and put in jail and held like in jail with like a formal charge. So you would have to be, they can't just knock on your door, take you to jail and keep you there. They have to say you are being charged with this. You are being charged with this specific crime. Lincoln is trying to stop these protests as quickly as possible. So what he decides to do is eliminate the right that people have to have that formal charge being put on them. So he arrests protesters and holds them without formal charges. So the question here that I'm putting to you right now is, do you think it was right for Lincoln to suspend the writ of habeas corpus? I definitely don't think there's a right or wrong answer here. I think that you kind of just go with what you think as far as you can tell right now.
Mr. Kosark, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. So the draft here, we talked a little bit about. We talked a little bit about the draft in the worksheet that we covered yesterday. If you haven't seen that video, it's going to be on Canvas. So the draft causes a lot of resentment and racial tensions between wealthy people and poorer people. A lot of times, more wealthy people could get out of the draft either by paying for substitutes to go in their place, or if you had more than 20 slaves in the South, you didn't have to fight at all. So this is going to cause problems between the two groups. Economic effects of the war. It made it impossible for farmers to harvest crops. If you're a farmer, you're either out fighting or your farmland is probably going to be taken over by battles. And that's going to cause a huge problem for you. Transportation is also going to be disrupted a lot of times by armies advancing and marching in. You're not just going to be able to use the train system like you used to, or use roads like you used to. The war is all encompassing in a lot of areas. As a result of these issues in the South, there was massive inflation. So inflation, the value of their money goes down while the price of goods goes up. So if you went to the store to buy a loaf of bread, it is still going to cost the same amount of money. Like, it's still going to be worth the same amount, but the money that you have is less valuable. So the bread's now going to be $10 when it used to be $3. And that's essentially what inflation is. So in the South, necessities, like basic necessities for living, increased by almost 100 times in the 4 years of the war. In the North, Congress passed the first income tax, tax on what a person earns. The government issued new paper currency called greenbacks, and that is going to try to ensure that people had money to spend. When we look at women during the Civil War, we also talked a little bit about this during the worksheet. We have images like this with Clara Barton starting the Red Cross. Over 20,000 women joined in as nurses during the Civil War. A lot of them took over office and factory jobs. And you can kind of see those numbers on this slide. This happens many times during war efforts. You'll see this going forward into World War I, World War II. When you get into later parts of the U.S. history, people take, when men go off to war, women fill in the need for workers and for different things that maybe they can't fulfill on the battlefield at this time. You have other women working as volunteers with regiments, Susie King Taylor. You also have hundreds of women disguising themselves to go and actually fight because they wanted to go and be a part of the war effort. And at this time, they were not able to do that. Obviously, Harriet Tubman, Underground Railroad, she worked with Union forces to spy. Jenny Hodgers actually disguised herself as a man and worked in the 95th Illinois Regiment. So women were a vital part of the war effort in the Civil War. Now, when we look at getting into some of these major battles, we're going to talk about Gettysburg first. We're going to refer to Gettysburg as very much a turning point in the war. In 1863, Lee has won major victories at Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville in Virginia, and he is feeling very confident at this moment. That confidence, because of these wins, he again tries to invade in the North, and the goal here is he wants to take over Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. As before, Lee hoped that a major victory in the North would then signal to the Union that it's time to either do peace talks or it would get other European countries to join with the South and get allies on their side, which they desperately need because they are running out of supplies and men compared to the Union. The Battle of Gettysburg takes place between June 1st and June 3rd, or sorry, July 1st and July 3rd in 1863. There are basically 3 days of battles. 90,000 Union troops under George Meade versus 75 Confederate troops under General Robert E. Lee. I'm going to show you this. I'm going to post this link. If you would like, I'm going to put it actually in the chat right now. So if you would like to go to this website at any point, you are more than welcome to. It is a really good visualization of what happens at Gettysburg. So if you look, this is the town of Gettysburg. We are, if I kind of zoom out a little bit to kind of show you where we're kind of at, just in the general scheme of things. So very much in Pennsylvania, and we have Union armies in blue, Confederate armies in red. So the Battle of Gettysburg basically starts, they bump into each other outside of Gettysburg. The Confederate army shifts in and tries to push the Union Army back into Gettysburg, which they are successful in doing. This, if you look at it will go through in this website decisive moments. So this is one of the first ones on July 1st at noon. Ewell decides to attack. So the Confederate leader here sees the Union infantry. He is going to be able to decide essentially that he wants to push in and attack the Union Army. So both sides are preparing to actually go to battle. The Confederates, if you look at the arrows, it will show you the direction that they are going. It is going to push them back into the town of Gettysburg. Another decisive moment is the Union is going to kind of anchor themselves down here on Cemetery Hill, which is going to be a very important part of the battle later in Gettysburg. So you see that at the end of the first day, the Confederate troops have really driven the Northern troops out of Gettysburg. So if you remember, we started back up north of Gettysburg, and now we are very much all south of Gettysburg. Lee decides to gather his troops and launch a major attack against the Union troops down south of Gettysburg on Cemetery Hill. And if we continue to go through into another decisive moment here, what really is a negative for General Lee, but a positive for the Union Army, is that the Union Army spots the Confederates just at the right time. So if you are looking towards the city, you can see all of this fighting and all of these troops going on. And what we see here to the west is that the Union Army barely is able to see that the Confederates are trying to flank them in the west, and they can see them on that ridge line out in the west of Gettysburg. So Warren is a Union leader, and he sees that. If we kind of skip through a little bit at the end of the second day and through the night, you have Union and Confederate soldiers fighting throughout the night. They're hunkered down. It is very fierce fighting over here on Culp's Hill, and night does fall there. One of the famous issues in Gettysburg, the Battle of Gettysburg, is that Lee commits to Picketts Charge, and Pickett is a Confederate general, and he goes and tries to push into Cemetery Hill to try to basically push them out of this area and kind of essentially end this once and for all. But what ends up happening is that the Union army is basically able to hold their own ground, and they are able to stop Pickett from charging, and they are able to drive them back. And basically, the Confederates have to retreat because they have suffered so many casualties. And because of that, when we look at some of the more finer details here of this, is that Lee is forced to retreat after losing over these 3 days 28,000 troops, especially after Pickett's Charge. It is a very, very very destructive time for the Confederates. They lose a lot of troops. Meade does not pursue. Meade is the Union general. He does not pursue these Confederates because they have lost also themselves 23,000 troops. So just in these 2 days, we're looking at 50,000 Americans dying just in these 3 days at Gettysburg. So Gettysburg would be the turning point in the war because Lee would be fighting now a defensive war. He has very much tried to continue to be on the offensive to get help from Europe to talk the North into going into peace talks, but now that is really never going to be able to even be an option to happen, simply because he doesn't have the men anymore, and he's never going to be able to recover from this defeat. Months later, in November, Lincoln goes to give the Gettysburg Address. You've probably heard the Gettysburg Address before, 7 years ago, all that. So this is a picture of Abraham Lincoln at Gettysburg. So one of the quotes from the Gettysburg Address: we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. So it's a very moving speech. It is one that is historically significant. If you can believe, it is actually only about 3 minutes long, so it's not like some giant written speech that he goes on and on and on about. But these words that are spoken and the sacrifice that is made at Gettysburg really energizes the North, and that's why sometimes it can be referred to as a turning point. So it is dedicated as National Cemetery, and that's you can go to Gettysburg and tour those things and see that National Cemetery. So here is another question for you. Why do you think Gettysburg is a turning point of the war? This can be, a sentence or some different words, but whatever you'd like to say about why do you think Gettysburg is a turning point in the war? Remember, in my class, we really do try to focus on, I'm sure Miss Allen and Miss Powers have also talked about this as well, making sure that you restate the question, you restate what is being asked of you, but then you also don't just you try to eliminate those theys and thems and its. You want to try to be as specific as possible. I think that's good. Maybe the Union did have, I don't know, maybe the Union had a better tactic, but they definitely had better outcomes to their tactics. And I think maybe the Confederates might have been overthinking it a little bit. Yeah, Gettysburg is a turning point because Lee would be fighting a defensive war. That is definitely boiling it down to the point. He's now going to not be able to be in a position of power anymore. Definitely not. CSA lost many men during this battle and couldn't recover from all the casualties. Absolutely. Plan to invade the North and force an immediate end to the war failed. Yep. Yeah, very good answers here. Hopefully that hopefully you are also watching these answers pop up. Even if you're not typing anything, it's no big deal. But it's good to see what other people are putting. Gettysburg was a turning point of the war because the North was losing hope. That's a very good thing to remember. Is that it's like a coach giving a pep talk at halftime. That's good. I like that a lot.
Thanks, Mr. Kosark.
Oh my gosh. I cannot believe this. What am I going to do? I can't even say those are good answers because it's going to,
Is it me? Is it
gosh.
not? You don't know.
All right. Well, those are good. That was a good one.
Thank you.
From a person with a college degree who has already learned about Gettysburg many times.
I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
But to all those people out there that are answering without college degrees, these are also good. So good job to you and your first times learning about these. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and move on here and go into the next slide here. So if you're still answering, I'm sorry, I got to move on. The next battle that we look at is Vicksburg. So this is, we can call this the Battle of Vicksburg. It also is going to be referred to as a siege. A siege is going to be something that you surround a city. You might think about this more in like a medieval setting, like you siege a castle, like you surround the castle, you encamp yourself, and then you try not to let anybody in or out to resupply the castle. So that's essentially what's going on in Vicksburg. Vicksburg is a Confederate town. The Union Army is going to surround Vicksburg. Vicksburg was the last major stronghold for the Confederates on the Mississippi River, and they desperately need to keep this if they want to have any chance of keeping the war effort going on their end in hopes of victory. When direct assaults did not work, Grant ordered a siege of the city in May of 1863. So I do have a few different maps to hopefully show you a little bit. They're a little confusing, but so in the beginning of May, he does try with direct assaults into Vicksburg. It doesn't work either time he attempts it. So what he does instead is, if you look here, from late May to early July, so we're talking, almost one full month, a little bit over a full month, he has surrounded Vicksburg and is essentially keeping everything from coming in and out. And, if you are worried about being stuck at home right now at your stay-at-home order, just imagine being surrounded by an army keeping you from even getting food. So that's a little bit more serious situation. So finally, the city does run out of food, and the people in Vicksburg are forced to surrender. July 4th, 1863, Vicksburg surrenders, allowing the Union to complete one part of that Anaconda Plan, which was to split the Confederacy into two parts. The victories at Vicksburg and Gettysburg are going to turn the war in the Union's favor, and because Grant has so much success at Vicksburg and previously in the Western campaigns, he is going to be named commander of all the Union armies in 1864. The next thing here is Sherman taking Atlanta and Sherman marching to the Atlantic Ocean. Grant taking over the army left William Tecumseh Sherman as commander of the Western armies. Grant ordered Sherman to attack from the west into the deep south. This is going to be known as Sherman's March to the Sea. This image right here is going to be what Sherman's March to the Sea looks like. It is going to be roughly a path of destruction, 60 miles wide and like 300 miles long. So Sherman orders this, or Grant orders Sherman to do this. Sherman's forces attack from Tennessee, They march from Tennessee. They then go into Atlanta by September of 1864. In November of 1864, Sherman orders that all of Atlanta should just be burned to the ground. Sherman begins marching from Atlanta to the Atlantic Ocean in a path of destruction, 60 miles wide, 300 miles long. Just imagine you are a Southerner in that path of destruction, or even near that path of destruction, how devastating it is going to be to see that, hear about that, and know that there's really nothing that can be done to stop it. Sherman attacks troops, destroyed railroad lines, crops, burned and looted towns. And in December of 1864, Sherman reached Savannah and turned then north to join Grant in Virginia. As he made his march, his army did grow as thousands of slaves joined in Sherman's army. So this is one of the kind of most destructive times during the Civil War. Sherman and his march to the sea, burning cities, destroying everything. That this idea of total war, basically just total destruction on everything that could be used to support the South. And this path of destruction really does a lot to lower morale in the South. So this is a question that is purely opinion. All right. Which one of these things do you think had the most important impact on the success of the Union? Gettysburg, Vicksburg, or Sherman's March? So, Gettysburg is obviously going to be that huge turning point. Vicksburg, the siege, and then Sherman's March, that show off of just total destruction. So just kind of put your opinion there, A, B, or C. I think that you could probably do a very good job of arguing any of those are the most important or more important than the other. I definitely think that Gettysburg being out in front by this much right now is probably what most people would try to argue, that Gettysburg has the most impact on the success of the Union. Just that overwhelming victory against the South, and now the South is not going to be able to push forward and do anything to basically go on the offensive anymore. But I think Vicksburg is a big one, ending that part of the Anaconda Plan and being able to just say we control all of the Mississippi River. I think that's an important aspect. So if you look at some of the results here, you have Gettysburg being out in front by quite a bit. So I think that's fair. But I think all three of these are going to be have a lot of good impact for the Union. The election of 1864 is also impacted by all of those things as well. Peace Democrats and Northerners are tired of the war. They nominate George McClellan, who, if you remember back to the beginning of the war, he is the guy that was very slow to act sometimes and maybe had instances where he could end the war but didn't. And he runs against President Lincoln for president. McClellan had a strong chance of winning the election on an anti-war campaign. However, Sherman wins in Georgia. Gettysburg is a huge victory. Vicksburg is a huge victory. The tide of the war is definitely beginning to turn towards the Union. And because of those things, President Lincoln wins re-election because of those victories. So the question here is, if you really had to look at it and think about it, do you think Lincoln would have won re-election if the North would have lost at Gettysburg, at Vicksburg? Either one of those. Do you think if they would have lost at Gettysburg, do you think McClellan would have had a stronger chance to win re-election because of that anti-war message? Do you think if the South was able to hold Gettysburg or Vicksburg, the Northerners who were really tired of the war would have been more vocal, and they would have said, "Hey, we got to end this. We got to get out of here. We are not being successful in any way." Yeah, I think that the most people are probably going to say no to this. I think Lincoln would have had a hard time making an argument that he was being successful if they would have lost both of those battles. I think it would have been very difficult for Lincoln to win. But I think with these victories, you see Lincoln having a large margin of success. So he wins re-election. He becomes president for a second term. We look at the ending of the war here and the kind of wrapping up of the fighting. Grant's Virginia campaign. This is also known as the Overland Campaign sometimes. Grant planned to keep attacking no matter the casualties. So it's very grim to think about, but Grant knows that if he's worried about saving casualties in any certain battle and allows the South to regroup and re-energize themselves, that the war will just go on for longer and they will lose more people in the long run. So the South is running out of men and supplies. Lee showed his military genius by being even outnumbered. He was able to maneuver, and his army was able to keep himself and his army from being captured. So it does go and show a lot of his skill, but at some point he's going to realize that it's just not something that he can do forever. So in May of 1864, Battle of the Wilderness, they suffer 17,000 casualties, but force Lee to retreat. May and June, Spotsylvania and Cold Harbor, Grant's army suffers another 7,000 casualties, but they'd get the victories or at least weaken Lee's army. Union troops were so sure that they would die in battle. So they know that this is happening. They know that we are pushing forward. We are going to fight no matter what. And we are, it's definitely a possibility that we will die. It's almost certain that this is going to happen. So they would begin to pin their names and addresses on their uniform jackets so that their bodies could be identified and their families notified. So just kind of the grim realities of the Civil War. June 1864, the Battle of Petersburg. Grant was unable to break the Confederate line. So what he does is he again tries to siege the city. And this time, instead of a month and a week of the siege of Vicksburg, this siege of Petersburg is going to last for the next 9 months. A long siege here. So we are basically, Grant is pushing from around Washington, D.C. area down in south of Virginia. So he goes Wilderness, Cold Harbor, Petersburg, which he eventually is going to siege for 9 months. And at the end of this siege, Robert E. Lee realizes that this is a hopeless cause. He knows that he can no longer hold the capital of Richmond. He tells Confederate President Jefferson Davis that the government of the Confederate States of America needs to leave Richmond, and the Confederates burn everything that they can that they think would be used by the Union. The fire spreads, burning pretty much the entirety of Richmond. Lincoln visits Richmond soon after its capture and is cheered on by former slaves. General Lee now knows that his situation is hopeless. He sends Grant a message that he is ready to surrender. And on April 9th, 1865, Lee and Grant meet at approximate, I always have trouble with this word. Miss Allen, can you say this word?
Appomattox.
Appomattox Courthouse to arrange surrender. Grant allowed that if the Confederates laid down their weapons, they could keep their private possessions and horses if they had them. And then Grant also fed the Confederate soldiers. So a very cordial, civil end to the surrender. Grant is not going to throw them all in prison and humiliate them and take everything. So the Civil War ends here with this surrender, but the war effort is not really over yet. I mean, if you look at some of the cost of the Civil War and the rebuilding efforts that are going to have to take place in the coming years, just look at all of the money that was spent. all of the human loss, the just all of this is going to, for years to come, make it difficult for the country in general. And for years to come, it's going to be a problem that we see. So the Civil War has ended. The Union has won. President Lincoln is the leader of that country, and now the leader of the entire United States once again. But now the nation has to rebuild. So I want you to think about that from his point of view. This is the last question. This is the last thing we're going to do today. How do you think Lincoln is feeling at the end of the war? This can be a sentence. This can be, a whole word. It can be whatever you would like it to be. Relieved, definitely. Maybe surprised. I think that definitely right after the war, these are going to be definitely feelings that he is having. But I also want everyone to think about the fact that he now has, 11 states that left the Union, and now has to worry about how are we going to fix this? How are we going to figure out what to do next? So I think stressed out, feeling two different ways. I think that accomplished, definitely. Excited about the end of the war. Victorious, but also stressed. Kind of where do they go from here? I think that's a good idea. I like the rise like a phoenix and rise from its own ashes. But that isn't easy. Definitely. I like that a lot. Miss Allen, did you write the where did we go from here part?
I did.
I almost didn't read it.
I know. You knew it. But I do like the Phoenix. That was
I like the Phoenix. That one's a lot. That one's better than yours. They're all better than yours, actually.
I will admit that is better than mine.
Yeah.
Parker, I could have guessed that. Good job.
All right. Well, that is the end of that very long and detailed lesson. I am very thankful for everybody that has stuck around and heard all of this and participated in the poll everywhere stuff. I think that helps out